This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
I liked Will Patton, who was General Bethlehem, and he was really melodramatic. I did like that aspect of it, but I think that Kevin Costner was maybe too melodramatic. He crossed that line where I think Will Patton didn't cross the line.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner totally crossed the line. And I wonder if at that point, by 1998, people had seen Dances with Wolves. They got it. And they're coming in expecting a post-apocalyptic drama, action drama. And they get a lot of sweeping scenes with a lot of speeches and monologues and kind of corny Shakespeare backs and forths. And it was all just kind of too much on the melodrama, too much on the forced acting.
Yeah. Well, Kevin Costner described the movie as like it's a fairy tale. Is the best. That's how he described it. And I mean, you watch the movie, it is like watching a fairy tale, really. You mentioned Bethlehem, who's played by, who was it again?
Will Patton.
Oh, he was brilliant in this movie. I loved him. He chewed up the scenery. He played the bad guy so well. I thought he was awesome in that.
Yeah, in a way, he stole the show, because I think that Kevin Costner, maybe he never quite found his stride in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Roger Ebert thought somebody else should have played the Postman. But I was reading, apparently David Brin thought Kevin was the perfect guy for the role. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
I think that Kevin Costner was perfect for it if he had just dialed it back slightly. I think he could have played the action hero, because that's, in a way, that's what the movie really did come down to, as an action movie with some deeper themes to it that could have been acted in that melodramatic way and pulled it off. It was just a bit too much.
The only person, because you mentioned in the notes, and I was thinking about it today and the other day, and who could have played that role. And the only other person I think who could have played it and pulled it off was maybe Mel Gibson or Bruce Willis.
Yeah. Mel Gibson at that time, that would have been a really good one.
Yeah, because it's interesting because Mel and Kevin have had similar type of careers where, like, The Patriot was kind of Mel Gibson's The Postman, and like Kevin's directed and Mel has directed, and they're famous for doing these big epic type of movies that have, really long running times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Braveheart is an example. There's a lot of similarities between the Braveheart and the Postman in some ways, where like the Braveheart is really melodramatic itself, and it's very sentimental.
Probably the thing that just steps the Postman up, and I'll agree with you. I'm probably at about a 75%. I'd give it a solid. It's a C+ B movie. It's definitely not an A. I also don't understand why people would just hate this movie with 1,000 Burning Suns. I don't think it was that bad. And there was a lot of it that was really engaging.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the story itself is very engaging, and the questions that it forces you to ask, in terms of like the wholeness philosophy, the big lie, the origins of mythology, the origins of how do you build society. I mean, in both the movie and the book, to me, one of the bigger themes is society's really easy to collapse. It's very difficult to build it back up, and in a sense, that's kind of like the traditionalist perspective, where yeah, you can burn Rome down in a couple of days. It takes thousands of years to build Rome back up, and all the institutions that we just kind of take for granted were built on top of our grandfathers and their grandfathers and their grandfathers, and it was done slowly over time. And the Postman is the first step in rebuilding that, and it's not going to happen overnight. But it only took 15 years for it. 15 years, I believe, in the movie or the book, they say, is to wreck it all.
It speaks a lot to how great our society is, but also how fragile it is every piece of our society is so interlocked together. And that's why it's so hard for political change to happen. Something happens and, well, why can't we just do this, and this, and that'll fix everything? Well, not really, because if you change this, that changes that, and that changes that. And this whole network effect starts to fall apart. And then that's probably in a modern society. That's why things work so well, but also are so hard to change. I think that, like they were saying in the book and in that quote, how it was just several shotgun blasts that the society could have survived, and you could easily have seen some sort of societal collapse. Like, let's just say during COVID, like that first month of COVID, where things were really dark. If you went to the grocery store, like, people are on edge. And what I was saying is, what if the credit card machines went down on the Eastern Seaboard? Well, people are trying to shop and they're already hoarding things already, and the stores can't fulfill those two things of scarcity, hoarding, and then a major disruption, or maybe a major electrical shutdown. You could have seen a society collapse into chaos really quickly. I mean, it was a while back. I think it was in like 2003 when the lights went out in New York City. There was a major power outage on the whole East Coast, and people remained pretty calm. But then there was one maybe 15 years before that where it was a absolute flipping disaster. There was rioting in the streets. People were dying. I mean, because we have such an advanced society, we're always kind of living on the edge.
Yeah. And you mentioned like the credit card machine goes down, and then everything kind of goes crazy, and then the electricity goes down and everything kind of goes crazy. And it only takes couple of minutes maybe for the electrical grid to go out, depending if it's like an EMT was an EMP strike.
Yeah, that was one of the things they said might have caused the collapse in the book.
How long did it take to get that electrical grid up in the first place? It's you know what I mean? Like, yeah, kind of goes back to my point, is it's easy to wreck things. It's hard. It's way harder to build things up. And I think one of the themes of the book too is like us modern people take for granted all these institutions that are just there, that took hundreds of years to build. I mean, even the United States, like its institutions go back to the English, that go back and back and back and back, and it was slowly built up over time.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President and other great shows. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more, and here is a quick word from our sponsors. A good place to start wrapping things up is the end of the movie, because the end of the movie, I think, shows the weakness of the plot, and maybe why people didn't like the movie, because I think that I'm interested to hear. Really, the end of the movie is that Kevin Costner finally dragged back into the fight against the Holnists he's buoyed by the spirit of the young people who are all joining up to become postmen. Earlier in the film, Kevin Costner was taken as a hostage by the Holnists and conscripted slave into their army. So once he passed their basic training, he was a Holnist. He is able to escape, and then he embraces the whole postman ideal. But then at the end, there's going to be a massive cavalry battle, and that was an incredible scene. They must have had thousands of horses on both sides, and I think that was real too. I don't think it was CGI in this field in the mountains. A beautiful, beautiful shot, beautiful aerial shot. But the whole thing boils down to is a battle of champions of the postman versus this ultimate warrior, fighter in every way, General Bethlehem, who's never lost a fight in his life, and then Kevin Costner, who's a traveling troubadour, an actor, beats him. Then, by the rules of the Holnists, Kevin Costner is the leader of their entire clan. What did you think about that ending?
I mean, there's a good quote here actually that will kind of explain. General Bethlehem says, "You see, the reason you don't want to die for anything is because you have nothing to die for. That's the difference between you and me. You don't believe in anything." And the postman responds, "I believe in the United States." And I mean, it's sentimental to think with the power of realizing what he has created and wanting to bring the United States back from the grave, the postman is able to, I don't know, it gives him a whiff of energy to be able to fight General Bethlehem. He's that much more motivated. But I will agree, it would have been better if they kind of shown Kevin learning some fighting skills other than, like, hand-to-hand fighting. I get the idea that they were going for with having them show down against each other and, one-on-one combat, because if you read ancient history, that's not made up. Like, the Romans used to fight Celts one-on-one, and that would decide battles, and there's numerous other examples in history.
Yeah, I thought that was cool, the Battle of the Champions. I just don't see, in a practical sense, they really just end the movie there, and then there's a postscript of 50-ish years later, or sometime later, where Kevin Costner is dead, and it looks like society has recovered and people are dressed nicely, and there's kind of a really, I mean, it's gone way past melodramatic, and I think it's really syrupy, treacly sweet and corny ending scene where basically Kevin Costner's daughter is giving a speech about how Kevin Costner, the postman, completely saved the world. So what they're really saying is that, did Kevin take on dictatorial powers after he didn't kill Bethlehem, which was a second problem, which we'll address? What could Kevin have done after he defeated Bethlehem and he's the leader of the postmen and the Holnists? How does that even work after that?
To me, that was I get what they were trying to do with the movie, as Kevin was playing the ultimate hero, where he's going to turn the other cheek and he'll let Bethlehem live and join in this new version of the United States that he inadvertently created. But it doesn't really jive with the movie because, in my opinion, because you have to kill Bethlehem under those circumstances. And one of the themes of the movie is how to be heroic, sometimes you have to do things you don't necessarily want to do. I mean, he started the whole postman thing as a lie to get some, lodging and free meals, and then it becomes bigger than him, and he ends up learning in that process he has to do some things that he doesn't necessarily want to do the right thing. And that would have been one of those circumstances where, the Holnists are dead. I've killed Bethlehem, and now we can start fresh. I didn't want to do that, but I had no choice.
Yeah, you can't go through and you can't recreate society with completely clean hands. And maybe your hands don't have to be as filthy as General Bethlehem's, but you're going to have to do some things that compromise your morals. And I don't think that Kevin Costner was ever going to compromise with his morals.
And it just would have made more sense in terms of like, okay, the Holnists drop what they're doing. Let's just say, for argument's sake, there was enough people in the Holness organization that they were just kind of going along, and as soon as they started hearing about the restored United States, they, given the opportunity, they would probably join up with that. There would still be enough people in that organization who still believed what Nathan Holm was telling people in the book. We find out that he wrote a book, and this is what inspired the whole movement. To be able to win those people's respect, you would have had to kill Bethlehem, and then you would slowly change them through that from that point on, because they would have to respect you as a strong man.
One way I think they could have tied that up much better than they did was not have Kevin Costner have ever been in the Holnists, because I think that whole point of Kevin Costner being in the Holnist was really just to set it up at the end that he could invoke Article 8 or 7 of their rules, that he could fight Bethlehem. And I don't think that was the best way to do it. I think they needed another character in the movie who was able to do the dirty work that could keep Kevin Costner's hands clean. That Ford Lincoln Mercury, he was played by Lorenz Tate. I think they could have used him as the person who becomes completely split loyalties. He understands where the Holnists are coming from, but he also it creates internal struggle, and maybe they could have done that through Kevin Costner too. I don't know, but they needed that internal conflict and maybe have a different ending to it. I just don't think how you could ever have it where somebody doesn't kill General Bethlehem.
Well, his right-hand man shoots him in the back, right?
Yeah.
So,
but that's such a cheap way out.
It's cheap, right? It is a cheap way out. That way, like, everyone keeps their hands clean, and it's a happy ending. And I will say, though, in terms of the movie, that ending, the whole way the movie is presented, that ending does kind of make sense. Where it's presented like a fairy tale, right? It almost is like a fairy tale ending. Whereas, say you were trying to go for a less melodramatic, less sentimental, less Slurpee's the word that used type of movie, and it was more hard hitting, more kind of realistic, where I don't know, let's just say Christopher Nolan was directing it. I could see it with that ending. That's probably the ending that would have gone with. Kevin shoots them, or somebody shoots them, and they go on from there. It just, for the movie that Kevin had made, Kevin Costner, it, in a weird kind of way, like the ending does kind of, it works within the context of the genre that he was creating the film in, right? Does that make sense to you?
It works. The ending works in that film. It just isn't. Even when I watched it when I was, I don't know how old I would have been at that point, but fairly young. I think I was maybe cynical enough to say, like, how could he have left it that General Holm let him live, and then Holm, the guy who his subordinate who hates and shoots him, and well, that solves that problem. It's just, it was not. I guess maybe in a way it was a fairy tale ending. It wasn't an adult ending.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. It's not an adult ending. It's the perfect ending to the fairy tale.
I don't think people hated it for one specific reason. I think there was a lot of little things that added up. That ending, and then the big a more than cameo of Tom Petty in the movie. And I think that was, they could have done something really interesting with that, and they didn't do it. and at least in my opinion. What was the whole scene with Tom Petty?
Yeah, so he shows up to it's Bridge City, right? I believe it's like a
Yeah.
semi-functioning like hydro dam. Kevin is at this point he had disbanded the Postman, right? And he was running away with Abby. Yeah, he was gonna hide there, and then the Wholeness end up finding him, and he's a little reluctant at first to say that he's the Postman, but after they show up, he tells the people and Tom Petty that he is the Postman, and he finds out that the Postman are showing up to where he was coming. He ends up taking the zip line bridge to get back to where he was coming from really quickly. And the whole scene's kind of played with, I don't know, it's done tongue in cheek a bit, like it somewhat comic relief, because Tom Petty's not an actor. So it's I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting that they used Tom Petty in that role, because to me it kind of shows that before whatever happened that messed up the entire world, it didn't really, you might have been famous in that world, but in this new world it doesn't really matter, because like Kevin Costner recognizes him as Tom Petty.
The problem I had with that was that Tom Petty was still the mayor of the town, the leader of the town. I think he could have got Tom Petty in there, and it would have made more sense if Tom Petty was sweeping the floor or doing some other menial labor. Then you come to find out that Tom Petty's the leader of the town. That is a pretty big deal. And that Tom Petty's money and notoriety may have helped him become the leader of the town.
Yeah, the way sweeping the floor, I'm just thinking about it right now. And it would have worked better if like Kevin just walks by him and he's like, "Hey, I know you're famous." And Tom Petty just responds, "Yeah, that was before," or something. Do you know what I mean? Like if they were just trying to get him into the movie somehow, and like that would have worked. I think that would have worked better. And you could have had a more serious actor playing that role. That whole thing with the Bridge City too is, I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't know. It just didn't seem necessary to me, really.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Yeah, it was another repeat of the cabin scene. He goes completely back to the cabin, and he needs to have Abby light a fire under him again. So I think maybe that's pulling in some of the feminist themes from the book, but it's not done in any way that you would even recognize it as a feminist theme.
And in terms of, we were talking about, like, this is a 3-hour movie, and I think that was one of the complaints a lot of people had, was this movie is so long. I mean, I'm not really bored when I'm watching. I've watched the movie like three times. I've watched it leading up to this podcast. So like
9 hours of the Postman.
9 hours. The
9.5 hours.
Yeah, but the whole Bridge City thing, like in terms of like cutting stuff out, like I don't know, they could have cut that whole thing out. It didn't really do anything, in my opinion. You know, he could have had like Kevin's walking away, and I don't know, Postman shows up and says General Bethlehem's coming to the town, and Abby's, you got to do the right thing, and that's it. Like they could have just cut that whole bridge part out. Probably would have saved them some money on the budget too, because that set didn't look cheap.
I thought, didn't you get kind of the idea that the whole film was an indulgence for Kevin Costner? That it's really Kevin Costner's it's all as close to a one-man play as you can get. There's a ton of Western motifs. It's all out west with the mountains and horse riding, which is stuff that Kevin Costner's all into. And then you have Tom Petty, who takes on a not insignificant role, and I think he might have been buddies with Tom Petty. It felt like a movie that was an indulgence for Kevin Costner.
Yeah, I would say 100%. It was Kevin. Well, he was coming off the success of Dances with Wolves, and the studios are just gonna allow him to do what he wanted to do, really. And this is the movie that he really wanted to make, and his fingerprints are all over it. And yeah, in some ways, in a lot of ways, it is indulgent on his behalf. But I enjoy I enjoy watching that sometimes where I don't know, just seeing an artist just, just do something that they want to do. And apparently the studio had asked him about cutting stuff out of the movie, and Kevin's like, absolutely no way. This is my baby. This is how I want it to be shown. Because apparently after initial reviews weren't that flattering, the biggest complaint was the running time. And they try to get him to cut it down, and Kevin's like, nope, we're not doing that. So in a lot of ways, yeah, it is self-indulgent, but sometimes it's fun to see an artist be self-indulgent.
Yeah, I could really see that they tossed him the keys, and it was maybe not the best move to just here's a budget, you're the director, you're the star, and just do whatever you want with it. And that they didn't keep some sort of reins on him.
And it's funny because they ended up doing the same thing with Waterworld, which is another one of those movies. Like, I think the director ended up quitting in that movie, and Kevin ended up finishing that, and his fingerprints are all over that, and that was a big box office flop. But then he in terms of like critical respect, he ended up doing the movie Open Range, which it's a smaller movie than the Postman and the Waterworld were, and that was critically acclaimed. So sometimes an artist needs somebody telling them, hey, you got to tone it down here. You got to, it helps having more than just one set of eyes.
I think that's probably, I 100% agree with that, is that there was nobody minding the shop. He was just allowed to go crazy and do what he wanted to do. And you needed somebody to trim this movie down. And like we've been saying the whole time, I think they could have used the 3-hour time limit and made something really good, really great. But they they kept too much flab in there.
Yeah, it has all the makings of being, and there's certain moments in the film where you go, oh man, like this really could have been like an all-time great epic. But only if they had, edited some stuff here, cut some of the fat off here, maybe done this, some little things differently. And yeah, it really could have been like one of the better movies of the 90s. But, that's not what happened. And like I pointed out earlier, it didn't seem like Kevin was really very interested in hearing other people's opinions in terms of what was left in the movie and the runtime.
He's such a great actor too, Kevin Costner. I mean, he has done so many great movies, but this one he just didn't quite pull it off.
It reminds me a little bit of David Lynch in the sense where David Lynch needs somebody to reel him in every once in a while, because when he's just allowed to go do his own thing, I enjoy watching it, but I can see why a lot of people go, like what is this? It's just totally self-indulgent. I don't get it. But like I pointed out, I enjoy watching artists be self-indulgent once in a while.
I suppose to wrap it up, what do you think? How do you think somebody should approach this film? If you're out there, you've never seen The Postman, I probably should have suggested this earlier than in the wrap up, but go and watch this movie and see what you think. But if you're telling somebody who's listened to this whole episode and they're like, oh man, should I really watch this? What's your appeal for somebody to watch it? For me, the appeal is it's a beautiful movie. It had a ton of promise. I would highly, highly recommend reading the book and watching the movie and then listening to this episode, because I think it will give you a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely read the book and watch the movie. If you guys listening to this haven't the Audible, I believe it's the Audible Plus plan, the book's free. So, and it's, I listened to it twice. It's about 8 hours long. So it's not that if you're listening to it or you just pick up the book and read it, right? So it's not like a very long, super long book. And for the movie, I'll just say, like, do you enjoy melodrama? Do you enjoy sentimentality? Do you enjoy an epic movie? Do you enjoy like overwrought emotions and kind of over the top performances? Do you enjoy an old fashioned morality play? I think you'll enjoy this movie. It's definitely not as bad as the reviews will have you believe. It's it's a solid 7 to 8 out of 10, and I quite enjoy. Like I quite like this movie. I liked it more the more times that I watched it.